Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Elswig. I've been working with advisors at wirehouse, regional, and independent firms for more than 40 years. I help advisors find the right home for their practice. I also help them think through monetization and succession options. That's a very important part of what I do. I have to say that these days, there's never been the amount of options available to advisors. And also, most of them, many of them have very complex business models that require a lot of due diligence. So um, that's part of the fun of my job. In any event, speaking about succession planning, today we have with us an expert on succession planning, Steve Tenney. Steve wrote a book called Succession Alpha, and he's a coach to RIAs all over the United States. And he works with them on a lot of different things, but typically he works with them on formulating a succession plan, strategies to grow their business, discusses how to increase their margins. And as you're going to see, once the webinar gets underway, those three things are a lot more interrelated than you might think. Now, Steve comes to this not from a theoretical or an academic standpoint. He's a guy who's been in the trenches and has actually taken the same journey that I imagine many of you are on right now. He was a successful, let me speak articulately, successful wirehouse advisor for 20 plus some odd years. He left, built an RIA that ultimately had 650 million in AUM, and then he sold it. So in terms of whatever your challenges are, what your perspective is, he's a guy who's been there. And I'm sure, one of the things that makes him so successful. And I think one thing you're going to take away from this webinar is it's going to give you a framework for thinking about how to evaluate and how to thrive in the present and how to set yourself up at the same time for future success. So I'm going to chat with Steve for, maybe 20 minutes or so. Then we'll open it up to questions, and I'll get the video out sometime next week. So Steve, welcome, and thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you,
Appreciate
Mark.
it.
I appreciate joining you.
Great, great. So maybe we should start. Perhaps you could just describe a little bit about the kind of coaching that you do and what really, how you decided to move into that area, how that came about, how you
Sure.
became, what prompted you to become an RIA coach.
Sure. Well, I'll actually take those in reverse order. After, it was 26 years at the Wirehouse, Payne Weber, UBS, and then 5 leading the RIA. And it was probably about 15 years ago or so when I was in my own coaching program and was encouraged to develop a niche. And for me, that was family-owned businesses, and especially multi-generational businesses.
Hmm.
So I really found a love for going deep with business owners and understanding their business, the industry, the dynamics, both personal and professional dynamics that were at play, all the different other resources that were needed by businesses. I equated it to a jigsaw puzzle without a box top. Not quite sure where things were going to lead, but it was a fascinating journey. Then that continued. I kept doing that the whole time I was at those 15 years, including my time at the RIA. And when it was time to leave the RIA, I said, I've got a love of working with business owners, and I've got a love for the independent side of this business. So why not put these two things together and work with owners of RIAs? And so, what I do today is help them with 3 broad topics. As you said, succession planning is clearly one of them. and then margin expansion and sustainable growth. And those three are all very closely related. You know, you can't have a great succession plan without some good organic growth. And margins certainly help valuation. Um, and having the right people in the right seats, doing the right things, that helps succession planning as well. So it's all tightly related.
Yeah, I know that makes sense. In fact, that's like another issue that I wanted really to dive into with you. In your book, I mean, one of the themes is that business planning and succession planning are very closely related, and that's not how advisors normally think about it. You have your business, then a couple of years before, it's time for the succession plan, and then you start to look for options. Perhaps you could just explain a little bit about how those two things are really more interrelated than many advisors realize.
Yeah, you're certainly right, Mark. And the risk here is that when people are not doing those same things, business planning, succession planning, when it comes time for them to transition out of the business or out of the firm, they're just not ready, and there's not enough time to get things in order the way they should be to have an optimal transition. So, I mentioned organic growth. Organic growth is probably the biggest lever or value driver when it comes to valuation. So having a good growth engine there is very important. Realizing that the average in the industry is low single digit organic growth rates. It's not very good. Um, you know, when you look at operationally, or if you look at um, what buyers are buying, they're buying future cash flows, future profits. That, if you work backwards, that relies on revenue. Therefore relies on assets. It means that the clients have to stay in the seats, and therefore the other advisors and the people at the firm have to stay in the seats. So getting the firm into shape so that everyone stays put and is happy staying put or thrilled to stay put, that's absolutely critical. So there's all kinds of things that go into that. Developing a great culture, accountability. Um, Again, I go back to the a phrase I used earlier, the right person in the right seat. Do you have, are you mitigating risks, et cetera? There's everything flows through to help the business thrive today as well as prepare for a great transition down the road. So the transition itself should, I'm overstating this slightly, but should almost be a so what? It should be a very natural kind of evolution.
Right. So a thriving business is kind of the one of the foundations of a great succession plan. But it's something that you really have to have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, another thing that you mentioned that's very interesting, in your book, you talk about best possible outcome.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. The whole that phrase came from a dear friend of mine, Austin Collins, who's in the Northwest, and it really resonated with me. Um, Best possible outcome is both personal and professional. What do you, as a person, um, as someone that's worked at this business for 30 or 40 years, what do you want to have happen? What do you want your next phase to look like? Um, so many of us, and I was guilty as charged here, we equate our sense of identity with the company. And so when the company is gone, we lose our identity. And unfortunately, 75% of business owners in all industries regret selling their company a year later. And it's largely out of a concept from the Exit Planning Institute, the personal readiness. They've got a three-legged stool. There's business readiness, personal finance, and personal readiness. And you've got to have all three legs of the stool. The one that gets overlooked is the personal readiness, unfortunately. And so I do enjoy diving into that with people. BPO also references the business itself and the structure. And what do you want this thing to look like? You're at $500 million now. Everyone seems to want to get to $1 billion. So do you want to get to $1 billion? Do you want a lifestyle practice? Do you want to get to 10 billion? Do you just want to ring the bell, thank the market for great valuations and move on? What It doesn't really matter what that BPO is, as long as it is thoroughly considered and examined. Um, and that's something that I enjoy diving into with people is they come up with their what they think is their BPO, and then I can ask them, well, why? And they give me an answer. Well, why is that important? And why is that important? And keep digging deeper and deeper, and also bringing up related topics, related angles that they just might not be aware of. Um, for example, if they want to uh, engage in inorganic growth or M&A, are they ready to have all these different locations? Are they ready for the stress that that can cause? Are they aware of the importance of integrations? Are they ready for the headaches of merging tech stacks? Um, or do they just want to stay as one location and grow the heck out of that? Again, it's up to them as long as they're testing assumptions. And sometimes I can help them see around the corner where one action will have certain consequences. I want to make sure they're aware of those consequences.
Right. So the larger point is that the BPO is particular to the individual, and it's both business and personal. And if they're selling, uh, part of what you're saying is, sounds like they have to be able to envision, what their identity is going to be in the next stage of life as at that point as a non-business owner too.
Yeah, and I will, that's well said, Mark. And I will add that your BPO should be consistent with the firm's vision, okay, which oftentimes a firm's vision receives input from other people at the firm. So it's not entirely done in isolation. Um, and this becomes especially important when you've got equity partners. So if you don't own 100% of the firm, let's say, and certainly if you own less than 50%, you got to make sure that your BPO, that your vision is in alignment with everyone else at the firm. When it is not, a lot of times it doesn't get talked about, but yet it can cause tremendous challenges.
Understood. So it's good to have clarity. Good to
Yep.
have clarity there on all levels. What about, I know a big issue is founder dependence. In other words, there are a lot of businesses that revolve around one owner. The owner is selling, he'll be stepping out at some point. So I wonder if you could talk about a little bit how does an RIA handle a challenge like that?
Yeah, that concept first came to me, and I'll attempt to give you the short version of the story. When I was building the niche around the family-owned businesses, and I was talking with the sixth generation of a lumber yard here in Maine with 500 employees, and it was just after the financial crisis. So construction fell off a cliff. They had too much debt, and he lost his voice, literally. And so he was forced to empower those people around him. And I talked to him a couple of years later. His voice had largely returned. And he said, Steve, you've got to make yourself less important. And one of the sections of my book is it's called It's About Not You, meaning it's about the others around you. And there are a couple different stages. Most people are aware of what delegating is. I'm doing something that is sort of lower value, I don't like to do, so I hand it off and someone does it. Fine. That's the first step. Second is um, taking responsibility that I have, giving it to someone else, and then they're coming to me, and there's some back and forth, and there's a decision, and they move forward. Ultimately, this is where we really want to get to. That person identifies issues, researches them, figures out the best solution, and solves it without even letting me as the owner know. That's absolutely beautiful when that happens. Now, why is this important? Again, I go back to the motivations of the buyer. And now this buyer, by the way, could be internal, could be external, doesn't matter. The buyer wants to keep revenue and profits, have that future stream of revenue and profits. Therefore, they need clients to stay in the seats, and therefore they need a team that is able to handle all the elements of the firm. If everything runs through me, if business development and portfolio management and planning and leadership and client relationships all run through me, who's going to handle it all? It's likely things are going to fall down, clients are going to leave, and so that is a very identifiable risk that buyers look at, that they consider, that will impact multiples. There's no doubt about it. Um, there are a couple exceptions, and that is, for example, technology or marketing. Sometimes those can be replaced by a larger external firm, but everything else is probably handled within the company, and you got to make sure that the people around you are really empowered to be thoroughly responsible for those actions.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. That's good advice. Um, what about any thoughts on internal versus external transitions? Because that's certainly a hot topic these days.
It really is, and it's been said that internal transitions aren't dead, but they're on life support. My friend Jay Hummel used that phrase. And I think that's well stated. There are two major challenges that firms face when it comes to internal transitions. One is the math. It's Firms are expensive, and you don't want to create a situation where the buyer, the next generation, for example, is saddled with a huge amount of debt. That's not fun. It's not safe, etc. So that naturally leads to external firms, roll-ups, platforms that have massive amounts of capital. That will also, by the way, impact the multiple. So generally speaking, an internal transition, you could be looking at a 30% discount, if not more. Now, you as the seller, as the owner, you might accept that. That's absolutely fine. That yes, this is even with 30%, 30, 40% discount, this is still enough for me, and I want the firm to stay as it is and perpetuate my legacy. Great. Some people may say, no, I don't want to give that up. I want the full amount, and that will lead them to an external sale. The other challenge that firms face is G2, the next generation. A lot of times there is a lack of G2, and even when there is a next generation there, maybe they aren't trusted, maybe they don't have the skills, don't have the experience. Those of us that grew up in the business, and have been doing it for a while, we remember Alan Greenspan raising rates in 1994, and the long-term capital management in 98, I think it was, and the tech bubble and the financial crisis and on, where many next generation advisors today were not in the business during the financial crisis. And so I think G1 a lot of times is very hesitant to hand over the reins to someone that doesn't know what it's like to go through a crisis like that and how that impacts planning, client relationships, investment management, firm management, everything.
Yeah. I see that also that there's a skill gap, especially like many of the G2 people that I see are really client service people. They're not rainmakers. They don't know how to get business. I think I would agree with you. It's very problematic to hand off a firm to people who can't develop new business.
Right.
That's a problem.
And it's I think we're making generalizations. There are some amazing younger people out there that frankly I think they are uninhibited by legacy thinking, legacy technology, and they've got incredible opportunities.
Yeah, well, that's great. So let me just take a question or two because we're bumping up against time. Let's see, here's one. I'm planning to retire or planning to sell my practice in the next 5 years. What are some things that I could do now to make it more valuable?
Good question. First is start learning a lot about exit planning. It doesn't have to be exit planning specific to RIAs, although that's important also, but exit planning in general and what are the issues and dynamics. Um, a lot of times you could the seller, the person transitioning out, can hire a consultant to walk them through that process. Um, More specifically, it's with 5 years, you've got time to work on people issues and growth. Those are the two most common challenges that any business face. So, addressing those people issues early on, I think is really important. Uh, that a lot of times can then lead to improving organic growth. Um, I think evolving the culture so that those around you feel more empowered is very important. Um, and getting clear on the BPO. Like, what do you want this to look like? What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want your identity to be? Um, Getting great clarity around those simple yet difficult questions is probably the most important thing because having that clarity, that will um, it will serve as both a magnet and a filter. It will attract the right solutions, the right ideas, the right people. It will repel or filter out those that are not right. And so getting great clarity is probably the first step.
I'll take one more. Um, this one I think you addressed kind of before, but but how about this? This one says, how do I reduce owner dependency without harming client relationships?
Yeah. That's a great one.
Yeah.
Because many of us, again, grew up in the business, and when we were doing that, we did everything. We did the planning, investing, business development, led the team, um, and led clients or guided clients. And you know what? We're good at it. We're really good at it. And you bring someone else in that's 10, 15, 20, 30 years younger, they don't have the experience, they're not quite as good. So to give up any of those things um, is really hard. There's a fear they're not going to do it as well. Uh, First of all, I think it's important to recognize that the next generation thinks and behaves differently, and that's okay. Let them do that. Next is develop very clear standards, what you expect, how you expect things to be done a certain way. Giving them some latitude. And then I think it's realize that you're not shooting for perfect. And when you hand these responsibilities over gradually, allow for some room, allow for some mistakes, some learning to happen. 80% is a great number. You do everything at an 80% level, you're going to be fine. Um, as long as we're not talking about things like trade errors or like things that are irreversible, or very consequential. So eventually what will happen is those people will get better at whatever those responsibilities are. And then your eyes are going to open and say, "Oh wow, if they can do they've evolved so they can handle that. Now we're going to move on to something else and hand something else off."
Yeah. Oh, so that sounds like great advice. So Steve, I want to thank you. I know I got a lot out of the out of our exchange. I'm sure our listeners did too. And thank you very much for sharing. It was highly informative and
Oh,
fun.
well, thank you, Mark. I love talking about the business and succession planning and engaging with other thoughtful people like you. So I appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It was great. Thank you, Steve.
All right.